Hey everyone, this is Michael Cole, VP of Marketing at Everflow. Today I'm joined by Jeremy. Jeremy, do you mind giving a quick introduction of yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Jeremy Horowitz. I run partnerships at Daasity. If anyone isn't familiar, Daasity is an actionable analytics platform helping fast-growing D2C brands understand their business better. So I have my hands dirty in a lot of different projects. I'm really excited to dive in today just to talk about really how brands can use the wins from within their business to continue to grow this year and ongoing.
Awesome. And can you give a little bit about your own personal background and how you became a part of Udacity?
Yeah, a little bit of a weird story. So I actually used to work on the brand side. So I was the e-commerce manager for a high growth Shopify Plus brand called Lumi, where we were selling Kim Kardashian's favorite selfie case. So I managed Shopify Plus and the Amazon, and then did a lot of digital marketing. And then what I always called my side hustle there was I built all of our essentially data practices in our internal data warehouse, and as well as our executive dashboards to review performance, and just really fell in love with it. And then eventually came and joined the Udacity team this year when we launched our Shopify app, became a Shopify Plus partner, and just kind of now I get to help many, many different brands of all sizes. We work with brands who are doing $1 million a year all the way up to $1 billion in sales. And it's just been really fun to see like how each business works, functions, and then what is really driving them forward.
Cool. One thing you mentioned there was that you helped lead Udacity to becoming a Shopify Plus app. How did you go from being a standard Shopify app to a Shopify Plus app?
Yeah, so I wasn't as directly involved with that specific project, but at a high level, there's an application process. So it depends on your Shopify app, your ranking, and then the clients that you have. And then there's a technical integration checklist. There's a kind of a sales and marketing integration checklist. And then you just kind of go through the process. And we were lucky enough to be in the first batch of technology partners that got that badge, which was really exciting.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've heard it can take a long time and be super hard.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact timeline, but we definitely had a lot of team members spending a lot of time to make sure that I was completely buttoned up.
Sweet. So why do Shopify companies use Udacity?
Yeah, so I think at its core, the brands that use us understand that the more that they analyze their business, the better that they understand how their business runs and how their customers interact with their business, the more successful they'll be. And so we really touch all areas of the business. I would say our primary use cases are the leadership team, kind of monitoring performance across all the different pieces of the business, and then really marketing team getting granular in performance, in what's driving sales, in what's driving customer lifetime value, and then the operation side, like how can we be more efficient? How can we be more profitable? How can we save more money? And also probably most importantly, like how can we make sure that we don't sell out to make sure that our marketing team can continue to sell? I would say that those are probably the three main drivers of why someone partners with us.
Awesome. And we'll drill down a bit into that for like more specific use cases for different types of clients, because there's clearly a lot of stuff you do. So I think as we get to some examples, it'll be easy to understand exactly like where the value lies for specific types of clients.
Definitely.
And to sort of like starting that off, like what is like one unexpected metric that you think that most Shopify merchants should regularly analyze?
Yeah. So hands down, the greatest mistake that all brands are making is that they're not consistently analyzing their contribution margin. So for anyone who isn't familiar with what contribution margin is, it's essentially your top line sales minus your discounts, refunds, returns, your product costs, and your associated marketing costs. So you'll hear a lot of investors refer to this as unit economics. You'll hear a lot of people talk about this in a lot of different ways, but it's essentially when all is said and done, you've sold the product. How much money did you actually keep to pay for things like your team, your office, invest in new areas? It's one of those things I just think it's so important to manage because you can always play around with how profitable you want to be. And there's a lot of areas, but if you don't understand on that per unit basis how you're performing, it just gets really tough to understand where you do go and make those big investments of whether it's a new marketing channel or whether it's a new product or whether it's hiring out more team members. The brands that really get that and really understand how it can even be small lifts. I mean, it all depends on your scale, but it really, if you can just continue to increase that number, it really just makes such a meaningful impact on your business that it was one of those major unlocks for me of like, when I started tracking it, I was like, I just saw everything differently. And I think it's really important for more brands to start to have that view into their performance.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I mean, from the B2B side, like that's a very standard metric that everyone uses, but I never hear it with e-commerce. And I'd be willing to bet the reason for that is just that most e-commerce companies don't have an easy way to track it. So it's something that they do like a quarterly audit to figure out this stuff, but they don't think about it day to day like a B2B SaaS company would. So I'm sure that having all the metrics in one place makes it a lot easier for them to get to that understanding.
Yeah. I mean, so when I was back at the brand side before Daasity, and seeing the contribution margin by marketing channel actually in a Daasity demo was why I joined the team, like literally that. Because I was so amazed that somewhere could track it. Because when I was back at the brand side, my finance team would literally send me the entire P&L 15 months after the month closed. Mm-hmm. So then I'd have to then figure back and then answer why profit was like that versus me being proactively able to adjust in mid-month or in midstream. Because it really, once you actually have to own those numbers, it really changes how you think about not only the incremental marketing spend, but promotions, discounts, what products you feature, all of those all those key levers that a brand needs to focus on to drive sales in the month. Sometimes we definitely get a little bit too focused on hitting a revenue number without thinking of what's the true impact to the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point and definitely super interesting. Cool. So what do you think are like the main problems that e-commerce stores are trying to solve by using Daasity?
Yeah. So what we hear most commonly are customer lifetime value and a lot of different views of their customer lifetime value. So customer lifetime value is kind of what I think to be one of the most misunderstood data points, but also like hottest topic. So the way that we calculate customer lifetime value is the gross margin per the average customer in your store based on how long they've been a customer. And so why that's important, one is what a lot of people call lifetime value is actually just lifetime revenue. Essentially, how much does a customer spend over their lifetime? But it doesn't take into account the fact that if I make one purchase and I buy a $100 product at a $50 margin, right? The business keeps about $50. I could buy 5 items at $20 at a $50 that's not a good example, at a $40 margin, and I'm only worth, let's say, $40 to the business. And so thinking about that and thinking about like where you invest marketing, where you invest, like a lot of business will go, oh, well, the repeat purchase is better because they're coming back and we're building a brand, but it also costs a lot more in fulfillment and in marketing. So really understanding that, and then kind of from a tactical perspective, right? Lifetime value by Skew. So what's the lifetime value by the first product that somebody purchases? And where can we start to gear more of our acquisition, knowing that those customers will stay for a long time? In that same respect, marketing channels. So which marketing channels that were acquiring a customer on their first purchase are actually generating that really high lifetime value, not just 1, 3, 5 months in, but 12 months later, 24 months later, 36 months later, as we really think about building the brand. And then I would say on the other side, it is that profit level data. Like what is our gross margin? What is our contribution margin? Because I think one of the unique things about our platform is we're tying so many data sources together that we can just present data and we can present calculations that outside of dumping everything into an Excel sheet and trying to match it back, it's pretty hard to do otherwise.
Yeah, those are great examples because I think it's like, I mean, I know what lifetime value is and I know like the value after all the expenses, but I don't hear it explained the way you explain it. Like people don't think about it in terms of like margins or anything else. And like the reason for that is it's just impractically hard to try and figure this out regularly inside of most businesses. So I think that that's like a perfect example of exactly where an analytics tool that simplifies your process makes a huge difference. Like we see that on our side, in like that we make it really easy to break down data, not on like a partner level, but like the granular placements of that partner to see the performance of each. And it's like making these things simpler changes everything in terms of a business, because it's not that businesses don't care about this stuff. It's that if it takes too long to figure out something, it doesn't make sense for a business to spend time on it.
Exactly.
And so I think that this is a perfect example of like, because you make it simple, like they can actually use this as part of their business process rather than as like a nice to have thing they maybe look at once a year, because otherwise like they would never get anything done. So really good examples.
Yeah. And something that's just been interesting working with Daasity, especially a range of clients, like also what I find is most brands, they don't have a dedicated data or analytics person. Like I kind of jokingly refer to it, but it's most of the time it's somebody's side job of like, I'm the performance marketer or I'm the head of ops and I need to get all this stuff done. And then I also need to report to the team. And if there's investors, the board and all those other things. And so, yeah, like if it's not actionable and if it's not quick, it gets so impossible. And yeah, like that's also why I brought the 15-day example up before. Like 15 days after a month closed, I got the numbers and it was like, okay, but I don't have a time machine. Like I can't go back and adjust anything that we did. And so that's why I think it's so important of the speed, especially also like it just takes a lot of time. Like if you dump out data from Shopify and Google Analytics and your marketing channels and all these other places, like it just takes a lot of time to consolidate all that data. Also, the numbers are always going to be off because every marketing channel is always going to take more credit for sales than what's in your POS. And so like having that and having that just like having your rules set in one place, I think is so valuable because then you can check it on a daily, weekly, whatever cadence is helpful for you. And you just pop in, you look at the reports that you need to look at, you understand where the business is, and then you immediately are able to make a decision, hopefully. Sometimes things take a little bit longer. But yeah, it just allows you to win faster than everyone else does. And just from everything that I've seen in the business, like that to me is one of the most important things for a brand to succeed. I've seen a lot of different variations of great products and great marketing and all of these other things, but the brands that move the quickest are usually the fastest to hit whatever goal they're typically looking to accomplish.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those takeaways that's always really interesting around analytics. It's just that like speed and simplicity lets you take just nice to have data and make it into like decision-making actions. But you can't do that unless you get it quick enough to be in that situation.
Yeah, it's funny. Some of our clients like will call us for like a major event, like we need this tomorrow. And it's always a fun scramble. But like, yeah, like you have those key moments in your business where you need to make a really tough decision. And those resources are really there to hopefully make that decision easier or to help make you more confident in the decision that you're making.
Great. So for a newly launching D2C, like direct-to-consumer type e-commerce Shopify merchant, what are typically the most important like base metrics for them to look at?
Yeah, I don't have anything crazy insightful here. I feel like for a base merchant, there's like for someone just starting out, there's tons. It's the basics, right? It's your traffic, like how many sessions are coming to your store. It's your, whether you want to track your conversion rate or just your number of transactions. I think it is right. You're calculating one out or you're just viewing one. And then to me, it's your average order value and your gross margin. Like, I think if you can watch those four metrics, and I feel right, because when you're starting out, it's all about just getting people to purchase and then trying to do that as profitably as possible. So I really like, don't complicate it, really just focus on those basics. And then what I also find is that every business, while like, I don't want to say everybody's the same, but like, I feel like Shopify has really pushed a more like structured way to launch a brand, or at least I see more brands launching in the same way now. But also in that journey to your first $1 million, there will be very unique pieces that emerge in your business as part of that. And so you'll also you'll build in and as you pull the thread, you'll find those new areas. And then as you go into those new areas, it's like, well, what does success look like? I think if you constantly have that mindset of we go into something new, what does success look like? What are some metrics we can just tie to understand? How did we do last month? How are we doing this month? How do we want to do next month? It's going to be really important. And you develop those kind of branches to that data tree that you want to be tracking and looking into as you build your business.
And can you give a quick definition of gross margin?
Sure. So a gross margin is going to be your top line sales Well, sorry, it's actually your net sales. So, right, so you have your sales and then anything that you've discounted down, any refunds that you had to give, and any returned product that you would technically as a refund, right? So you take that and then you subtract out your product cost. So let's say that I sell black hoodies for $100 on my website. We're usually operating somewhere around, let's just combine refunds and discounts to about 5% or $5. And then it costs me $50 to make the shirt. Right. So that $100 minus 5 minus 50. So I would, for every hoodie that I sell under that model, I would make $45. And that $45 is my gross margin.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's always helpful to just reiterate the basic metrics because it's easy to lose track and start thinking that you think something's one way and then realize like a year down the line that you've been doing the math wrong the entire time because you weren't calculating something.
Yeah. And then it's that, oh no moment. Hopefully it's not on the accounting side or there's a professional that knows how to handle that. But yeah, I've definitely had a couple of those moments in my career.
But especially on the marketing side, like a lot of these stats are like internal anyway. So it's not like anyone else is reviewing them to be like, what are you doing here? It's more like you're like, I'm using this for my internal thought process and I've not included everything.
Yeah. But for anyone who is on the marketing side, who their team doesn't share that like margin side, to me, that was the thing that changed how effective I considered myself as a marketer. And it's actually something that I hope we see more in the industry. I feel like marketers aren't given access to that more operational side data, but that is literally what determines your budget. Your gross margin, product costs, shipping costs, all of those costs to the business are going to determine how a marketer is, one, how their performance is based, because your return numbers and your goal numbers are going to be set on those margin numbers. And so it's really important, I think, for all marketers to dive into that data, to understand it so that they can make more informed decisions. So that, like, something that happened to me was we thought we were crushing it one month where we had spent over $100,000 in paid media budget. We hit our 3x ROAS that we were told we needed to hit. We had run one too many discounts. And after the month was over, we were told that despite hitting all of the things that we were told we were measured by success, that the month was actually a huge failure because of all of these other things that happened that we weren't aware of on the cost side and how some things were structured. And so I think it gives marketers an edge when you think through that manner, because it changes the strategies that you also roll out that then help not only yourself, but the business as a whole.
Yeah. And the other thing is it just helps you be more aggressive when you can be more aggressive. Like if you have been like, well, this channel's not very effective, we're only driving like a handful of sales every month. If like you have the exact numbers of like the profit of a customer from that channel, you might be like, of course we should run this and figure out how we can scale it further. Like it may not be high volume, but if it's like fitting within like our margins and like we're calculating for all the costs and this is just a profitable channel, like that's just extra sales you're getting at the end of the day. And it is worth like maintaining and scaling those things. But if you don't have that data, like you don't want to spend a ton of time on something that may not be worth your time. But once you have the data, you're like, of course it is. Like it's just pure profit.
Yeah. And I think the other important piece, because we see this a lot, is sometimes those smaller channels that may not have the huge top line numbers are driving a considerable amount of profitable sales. And it's actually a lower lift to drive the same incremental profit gains that you want from that channel than trying to figure out how to squeeze another couple of points of ROAS out of a scaled Facebook or a scaled Google account. And so it's that type of deep information about your own business and the understanding of the mechanics behind how everything works is like, to me, that's the edge. Like I like to think of especially paid media and performance marketing kind of like Wall Street and like in stock traders. Like you're essentially making a bunch of calculated bets and spending budget. And those Wall Street traders know the best and fastest data is what makes you win. And I'm hoping, maybe I read a little bit too much Michael Lewis, but I'm hoping that performance marketers and everybody in this space really starts to take that same mindset, because at a certain point, this will become a game of speed. And the people who have the best information the quickest will be able to make the best decisions before everyone else will. And that's really where your greatest gains are going to come from.
That is a very interesting point. And also it's impossible to read too much Michael Lewis.
Okay. Most of my shelf I have a lot of Michael Lewis stuff, so I'm glad that somebody agrees with that.
He is definitely one of those people you're just like, gosh, what an incredibly talented writer.
Yeah. Especially the breadth of stuff he covers.
Well, he understands like he could cover any topic as long as he's focusing on the people in it and figuring out what's interesting about the people behind it.
Yeah. And then the book is written through that lens, which then makes it interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I could go on this for a 45-minute tangent.
Cool. So let's go back to that D2C brand. Now that they're over $1 million in sales a month and growing fast, what kind of metrics do you recommend for like a fast growing company that's already had traction?
Yeah. So we work with a bunch. So it's really interesting because this is where I really believe that the brands start to diverge. Like it's no longer cookie cutter. Everyone is the same. So a lot of brands are focusing on what are their growth levers and how much can they afford to continue to scale at that speed. And so really granularly defining how are our marketing channels performing together. I personally believe that if you're an 8-figure business, some will disprove this theory, but most brands need to have a couple or a stable of really strong marketing channels that can support that type of volume of sales. So really understanding how they perform together, really having a granular understanding of, okay, all of the marketing platforms themselves are saying this performance, but this is what we're actually seeing on the back end. And not necessarily saying, oh, this one channel is actually driving sales and not that one. It's more of understanding how that holistically plays together and what that journey is across all of those brands. And then on the other side, really understanding how you're shipping products, how you're storing products, what are your associated costs, how can you deliver that product in a great experience? And then as you start to scale up, where are those efficiencies that you can start driving costs down? I think especially for fast growing brands, they're so concerned about just getting product at the door and making sure that everybody's happy that sometimes you overlook the fact that you've been air freighting everything instead of putting it by ocean. And that's 10x your costs or whatever the disparity is for a specific carrier. Whereas if you just start projecting out your orders by a couple months, you could start oceaning a lot more because you now have that scale. And there's also a lot of other things that go down that path, like maybe better rates from your suppliers and all of those other things. And then the last thing that I think is really important, kind of the third pillar, is really, really, truly understanding your product catalog. Understanding what sells, what doesn't sell, and what are the velocities behind that. What are products that are picking up that we should either put more fuel behind if we can and if we have the inventory, or maybe pulling back because we don't want to go spend $1 million on paid media to drive a bunch of people to the site and then sell out in 3 days. And so really also understanding how to move inventory. I think a major kind of like the black swan's not the right word, but the sudden heart attack that kills most of those fast growing e-com brands is they get stuck with dead inventory. There's something that they either bought too much of or that didn't move quite at the speed that they thought it was going to. And now they're stuck in a cash situation because really at the end of the day, an e-com business comes down to how short can you make your cycle between when you pay for inventory and when you get paid back for it. And so really understanding how can we move more product? How can we move more profitable product? And if it's not one thing, then how do we bundle things together? I was really excited this past holiday season to see so many brands really think through meaningful bundles and kits and those upsell valuable like just offerings. And so thinking about, okay, how do we just keep moving product out of our warehouse is something that's also, I think, so essential at that stage because everything becomes so expensive once you get into that high 7, low 8-figure brand, and you're not quite big enough where big banks will lend you money. You're in that awkward stage of some VCs will invest, some won't, and it's not always the right move to go to private equity. So managing your cash flow at that point is so essential to continuing to grow really quickly. And so I think it's really right. Like we're essentially talking about the two main ways that money is leaving the business between the marketing and the operation side. And then where the most of your cash is actually sitting in your business is your inventory.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, I think that like, especially the second half is like great for thinking about all of the fast growing companies that have failed in the past. So thinking about companies like, I don't know, Krispy Kreme was the first one that came to mind. Of these companies that expanded super quickly and then realized that like there was something wrong about the way that they thought their economics would work, that like they expanded too quickly and it all collapsed because the back end wasn't set up for it to handle that many stores and that many donuts. So I think that that is just interesting to think about. Like, these are things that matter, and like the faster you grow, the more they matter, because you can overextend yourself and keep going like a wily coyote chasing after a roadrunner. You can go off the cliff and still be in the air for a little while before you realize that you're about to drop.
Yeah. And this isn't a cartoon. You won't just respawn in the next scene. Yeah, those are some, I've unfortunately seen some of those moments as well. And it's just painful to go through that. So we're on a mission to make sure that as few brands as possible get themselves into that situation.
Awesome. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about briefly was, I think what you said about growth levers is super interesting, because that's definitely been what we've been preaching internally, is that one of the values we see for Everflow is the fact that you can consolidate all of your performance marketing. So you can have your media buying next to your partners and your influencers. All of those analytics can be in a single place. And I think that this is so important for what you were bringing up. Like, unless you have it all in one place, you really can't see how each of them touch the consumer and where each of them drive value and engagement. Like, it's not enough. Like, if you're buying from Facebook and Google and you're managing affiliates here and you're managing influencers there, it's really hard if you don't have them all in the same place to understand where exactly each of them are delivering value and where they're overlapping. And from my experience in the affiliate marketing world, like, this, so much of like scaled brands is about the fact that you start getting all these silos of people handling different parts of the marketing, and each one arguing why they delivered all the value and that they should get credit for every single sale that has ever come into the company. And so, like, unless you have like the data and analytics to see everything in comparison to each other, you really can't understand, like, A, what's working, and B, who deserves credit in your company and who deserves credit outside your company.
Yeah. So a lot of our brands refer to that as their single source of truth. Like, what is at one place? I like to think of it as like, where's our campfire that we can all sit around and have a conversation around? Because it's so true, right? Like, usually, especially as you specialize and really want to grow each channel, you've got a bunch of teams who have their own budgets, their own priorities, and they're constantly, right? You want to feed the beast, so they constantly want more. And at a certain point, you have to start making some strategic decisions about where to place your investments. And yeah, it's so true. Like, I think one of the, and this is a little bit more technical, that I don't think people understand the value of our platform, but is the, like, how this has to work is we transform all of the data from all of the sources. And so I'm sure you all do this as well, but in English, what that means is we essentially go and pull out as much data from every source as possible. And then usually based on Shopify data, if they're a Shopify brand, we'll go and we'll essentially normalize and organize all of the data so that we can figure out, because realistically, right, today's modern consumer is going to see you on social, search for you, sign up for the email list, maybe the SMS list. Like, they're going to go through all of your marketing channels. They're all going to take credit for those sales. So understanding and allowing you to put the rules in place of, this is how I want to see everything, and this is how I want to judge how performance is happening. Because yeah, I've seen so many brands kind of sputter out despite just astronomic growth because they got lost in the myriad of different data. And so to us, it's really important to give brands as much visibility into their business as possible so that they can understand, like, okay, because actually from my experience, it was harder to make the big investments in where to put more marketing budget than it was to cut. We actually like kind of knew the marketing channels that weren't really performing that well, but when we had that $10,000, $20,000 in extra budget in a month, that was actually where most of my previous role, like, that's actually where most of our conflict came from, was we were trying to figure out, like, well, this is driving all this sales and this is driving all this sales. And we didn't have that single source of truth at the time. And so it's just really important also from like a team building perspective to get everybody on the same page so that they know that, hey, maybe that other team did get the budget, but it's going to feed you in this respect and your numbers are going to go up because we made that investment and because we know that journey that you were mentioning before. And that is so important because then that team has perspective and then they can go and build off of that as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as I've seen a lot of times people will run like influencer campaigns and it won't deliver very many sales, but all of a sudden their Facebook ads start converting way higher. You get things from like their other paid marketing that just all picks up. Like, not all of your marketing is interrelated and they all connect. And the better you can understand like where each of them deliver value, like the more like you can actually make the right decisions about what your company needs to grow.
Yeah, exactly. Because right, like maybe that influencer, you didn't give them a discount code or there was no direct link, but yeah, your Facebook's popped off a lot. Your direct traffic came like spiked. Your organic search spiked a lot. And so those things that are harder to track, it's still important to understand how those pops happen, because if it does and you miss it, there could be potentially 5 or 6 more opportunities in a year that are just like that you didn't invest in because you weren't confident in that alley, because you didn't have that data to back it up. And like, it's always the, what could have been.
Yep. But I mean, as you mentioned, like the thing you always have to keep in mind with data is that like it's a what is that? Double-edged blade? Like it can cut in both directions. So if you try and collect data on every single thing and you try and like go through spreadsheets to like figure out what that data means, like it's very easy to get overwhelmed and just never look at it again. Like it's not enough to have data. It's about having data in a like digestible form where you can actually make like real decisions and insights from. It's like data alone is not the answer.
Yeah, we're big believers in data empowerment. It's an admirable mission to go and to track every single thing and to really be data informed about everything possible. I have yet to find anybody who's able to accomplish that across every single thing that they do. I think whoever does that, give me a call. I would love to work for you. I will be happy to ring the bell on the NASDAQ the day that that company IPOs. But yeah, I think it's all about like, what is right in front of us? What's the strategy that we need to determine? And what's the most amount of information that's helpful for us to make that decision? And especially like if we're talking about a high growth brand that went from 0 to $1 million a month in a year, like you just need to move quickly and you need to make those decisions quickly. And that's, again, that speed to decision is so important.
So speaking about that, for some of your more successful clients, have you seen any particularly effective strategies they're using to massively benefit from the data they have through your reporting analytics?
Yeah, so I would say there's 3 things that I typically see are across our larger brands that are doing really, really well. So they have we call it a daily flash, but they have an executive dashboard, something that is I love it. Our CEO has this phrase, the 6-pack. Essentially, like what are the 6 metrics or like just that really what you focus in on? They view that daily. So, right, kind of going back to the beginning, at a certain function, all D2C e-com brands need to focus on their traffic, on their conversion, on how much money they're making, on how much money they're keeping. And then a couple of those other key metrics that matter for each individual business. They have that and they look at it either, some of our really bigger clients look at it hourly, but most companies look at that daily and weekly. And so really like having that, this is where we're going, this is our key strategy, these are the things that matter the most, really focusing on that. I think and I say this very I call myself a data nerd, so I say this very endearingly. I think for our marketing nerds, they really dive into the customer lifetime data. They really start to think about how can we really intelligently segment not only our ads, but also our on-site and email, retargeting, all of those channels around our customer lifetime value. And how do we leverage that to be as successful as possible? So, right, once we have that decision, once we understand, here's the flow of where our high customer lifetime value customers are coming from, what are they buying, and then how are we keeping them? Really just optimizing that. And then focusing on the supporting, what I call the supporting KPIs, to really just optimize that flow as much as possible. Because, right, once you can really, really leverage that up, you can get those cheaper gains or low hanging fruit. And then that's what allows them to create their own budget to then go and invest in those other programs that might be a little bit more of a heavier, expensive lift. And then I think the third piece that a lot of brands look for, and this might just be my bias because I personally love it, is we have a lot of product affinity and product reporting data on what's selling, what channels are driving those sales, what is the profitability of those products, what are people buying together, and then also tying that back in, well, so two pieces on the marketing side, tying that back into exactly what we just talked about, right? How do we merchandise products in our ads, on site, in our emails, to make sure that people are buying the stuff we want them to buy, and that will really propel our business forward? Or if they're buying stuff that maybe isn't our ideal product, but it's a loss leader or an anchor product for us, how do we glom on those other products to make them more profitable, to keep them coming back, to really build that business up? And then on the operation side, just like we'll call it a, oh boy, preventer. I don't want to curse, but let's just make sure that there's nothing that catches us off guard, and just being as proactive as possible. I think that that's just a really big theme that you'll probably hear myself and a lot of us talk about, is just like being as proactive as possible in all of those respects, to make sure that you're just not in that moment where there isn't anything you can do. Because I think what excites so many people about D2C e-commerce is that you really can control your own destiny. I mean, sure, there are some factors at play that eventually get out of your control, but there's so much that's within a brand's control that it's really important just to make sure that you don't have a moment where you could be selling, but you actually can't drive any marketing or sales because you're sold out of a product, or something else like a marketing channel went down. Like those things those things happen, but if you're proactive about it, if you have a plan, if you can adjust quickly, and especially in 2020 with all of the crazy stuff we saw. I mean, we had companies that were massive in retail completely shut down, but were able to conserve all of their top line sales through their direct to consumer. Like,
awesome.
Just the proactiveness and the speed to make fast decisions, and whatever you want to call it, be agile, pivot. Sorry, I don't have something that isn't just kind of a buzzword business term at this point, but just making decisions and adjusting to where the market is and you think is moving. I think just at a high level, to kind of summarize all of those points, is where we've seen the most success from our brands.
Awesome. And I'd love to go back a little bit to the product affinity one. So how does someone actually figure out, like, hey, if I have 15 widgets on my site, like these two widgets like can be connected and like people will usually buy the second one? Like, how are people actually figuring out that I should start like upselling the second widget if they buy this first widget?
Yeah, sure. So complete plug here. So if anybody doesn't want to hear a plug, put me on mute for the next 2 minutes.
No, this is a place for plugs. As long as it's relevant, it's good.
So in our out of the box standard offering, we have what are called product affinity maps. So it's essentially just a report that says on the left column, here's everything so there's two reports. The first one is same session. So when someone comes to your site and makes a purchase the first time, here's what they added to their cart in their first product. And then before they made a purchase, here's the other product that was added most likely. And then we show the connection of how frequently that happens. So let's say that on my black hoodie store, I sell black hoodies. I also sell belts, t-shirts, and hats. And so for my hoodies, they're most likely added in that same session with t-shirts. And then we have a second report that is the same concept, but what are people buying in their first purchase? And then where do they come back to buy in their second purchase? So then you can see, okay, people bought a black hoodie the first time, and then they actually love my hoodie so much that the second time they came back and bought a blue one or a white one or whatever favorite color that we offer. And so we just offer that because we found that for the businesses that understand upselling, cross-selling, AOV maximization, profit maximization, like that's where you can really meaningfully raise your revenue and profit at the same time. So we want to just show that simply so that a brand can quickly identify, okay, we know that black hoodie is our anchor product. We know that they're buying this. Let's just on site present this with an offer so that we get people to buy hoodies and t-shirts together. And we can just drive as many sales as possible. And then for that first to second, how do we make sure that our retargeting ads, how do we make sure that our follow-up emails, SMS, any channel that you really want is pushing those products, because we know that that's happening organically.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, and like a great example with like the retargeting ads. Like if you know that most consumers want to buy the second product anyway, like that's an amazing way to get someone back to becoming a regular customer. Because there's a big difference between someone who buys once from your site and someone who buys twice from your site. Like the chance that they'll come back a third time, I'm sure, is like, well, I mean, it's 100%, because if they didn't come the second time, they never got there. But I'm sure that is a much higher value customer if you can get them through that second purchase. So knowing exactly what is most likely, like that's extremely helpful for figuring out what to promote to them in the first place.
Yeah, and especially with so many brands today that are so heavily invested in acquisition, that second purchase can literally be the determination of whether you're profitable on that customer or not.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like one of the other silent killers that I see so many brands fall into is they get so wrapped up in acquisition and so wrapped up in growth that they're actually barely or unprofitable on their first purchase, and they have no retention or no
Mm-hmm.
back end to keep people bringing back, which I'm going to guess is why Shopify included retention as one of their major themes for 2021. That they get into this like race, like Wile E. Coyote example, where they just get into this race where they're now a big brand, they have a lot of sales, but they're not actually profitable.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, like especially solving that, what I call the one and done problem, is really a huge determinant of whether a brand has long-term success
Mm-hmm.
versus can just grow really quickly.
Yeah, I discussed this a bit with Celery's CEO, and it was sort of like there's in the like e-commerce and direct to consumer world, that there's a little bit of lacking around like nurturing of customers, and e-commerce could benefit a lot. Like someone who's purchased from you, like if your product's great, you should be nurturing them, not immediately, give them some time to enjoy their product, but like that is an opportunity to build like a long-term relationship, because they have your product, they understand the value you have, and the more that you can have, more value you can provide them, like that builds them into a lifetime customer, and that's way more beneficial than getting 3 new customers in the door. So focusing on the second purchase and how you manage and nurture that relationship is definitely probably going to be a huge opportunity for like these e-commerce brands that now have way more customers this year than ever before.
Yeah. And for anybody who thinks that their product does not fit that model, I will challenge you. Cause I used to be one of those people. So, right, we were selling a phone case that was supposed to be like the one phone case you needed until you upgraded your phone. So it was like, okay, it's an 18 or 24-month sales cycle. We make one purchase, we're done with them for 2 years, which at that point in time was basically like a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
But our greatest unlock was actually selling more into the existing customer base. And I cannot tell you how many customers would spend hundreds to thousands of dollars in 1 year on a phone case that was supposed to be the only phone case you ever needed. And I'm seeing this with so many other brands. I mean, sure, if you sell cars or like homes, I don't know anybody who's doing that D2C comp, but like if you sell a true one purchase product that you don't really need to sell another like in a really long time frame, I get that. But even like mattress brands are starting to sell bedding and other accessories as well. Like it's just becoming so expensive to acquire a customer. You really have to have something on the back end to keep people coming back if you want to be profitable.
Yeah. And I mean, like cars are a great example of like, yes, lots of people only buy one car every like 5 to 10 years, but also the super fans buy lots and lots of cars and then just complain about the fact they have no place to put them. Because once your identity gets wrapped up in a product, like you want to support that brand and you want to have it reflect you as a person. So even in the products that they don't need more than one, like people will still buy multiple things if it becomes something that they associate with themselves.
Yeah. And I'm just going to really harp in on this point because I just like really strongly believe this. And I think an incredible example is even Tesla, right? Like 50, 80, $100,000 crazy cars. Like you buy one. I mean, some people are buying multiple, but like, right, you buy one, it suits the job. They made their sale, but it's going to get so expensive eventually for them to acquire a new customer that my dad has like 5 pieces of Tesla apparel. And so like, sure, don't get me wrong, their apparel is not close to a 50,000, 80, whatever $1,000 car, but it's incremental profit that keeps them buying and just keeps them around the brand. And to me, that's what's most important, because then, right, it's the referrals, it's all of that other piece that then will long-term build the brand that it's only beneficial to keep people coming back.
Awesome. So to pivot a bit to a separate side of the conversation, like I'd love to learn a little bit more about the internal side of your business, in terms of like how does Shopify ecosystem fit within your own growth strategy?
Yeah, so Shopify is a major part of our growth strategy. So as I mentioned before, Shopify app rolled out this year. We became a Shopify Plus partner. The overwhelming majority of brands on our platform are on Shopify or Shopify Plus, the overwhelming majority of where our potential customers come from are vendors and partners in the Shopify space. And that could be agencies, other Shopify brands. I've actually spent my entire career in the Shopify space. Way back in the day, I actually started building sites and apps on Shopify, went to the brand side, then I'm now back on the B2B side. But yeah, I mean, Shopify is just and it's also just a really cool community. I've seen a bunch of other like communities that circle around some key product, and it's always just interesting to see the community that bubbles up around it. And I'm a really big fan of the type of community that even the entire like ecosystem of Shopify, vendors, customers, all the different pieces, how we all interact.
Yeah, and on that point, since you handle partnerships there, like how do you actually, like what does like partnerships look like for you, and how do you connect, like where do you find like the most value connecting in the ecosystem?
Oh man. I mean, there's so many things, and this is probably also because I have a little bit of ADD. But at a really high level, I mean, I think it's doing things like this. Like I am the biggest proponent of how do we just help people be better at what they're doing, and how do we provide educational content? So that's been a really big part, at least of my partnership push at Daasity, is we try to put out just a lot of content. As you said before, there's a lot of weird, crazy terms and acronyms and ways to look at stuff that could be confusing, especially in the data and analytics space. So like that's been a big thing for me, is to maybe not, I mean, demystify, but also just like build a repository of helpful information. So I think like that also leads a lot of our strategy of like, we also do a lot of content with partners that are, right, how do you leverage this plus us together, and how can you like what's the new strategy, what's the new tactic, maybe what's one thing that you haven't thought of before. I think the other piece is and this hopefully is a good answer, I mean, our entire business is based off of integrations. We pull in data from other sources, we do a ton of work after that and we create a lot of value in that process. But I mean, essentially, like, we're pulling in from Shopify, we're pulling in from your email provider, from your customer support provider, from your returns provider, from all these different places. And so making sure that we're working with that partner to make the most value that the end merchant gets out of not only our tool, but theirs as well, I at least consider to be extremely important in our business. So I think that that's what drives a lot of it as well, is that we're in a position where we succeed by helping everyone else succeed a lot. And to me personally, that's a position that I enjoy being in.
So let's see, like with say like we have like, you're looking into a new strategic partnership, like typically how does that, with like a tech partner, like how does that come about? What was sort of like the first step, and what is typically the first way that you work with them?
Yeah, 90% come from our customers. So almost, I mean, before I joined, almost all of our partnerships were literally our customers being like, this is awesome, but now I want to look at this new data source, and I want to look at this new place to pull in information, and I want to start adding that in. So that's honestly how the overwhelming majority of our partnerships established, especially in the early days, and still is what drives a lot of our current partner initiatives. And then to be honest, what I consider part of my job is to constantly be looking at what's coming next. 2020 seemed to be the wave of SMS, between players getting into the space, between a lot of brands adopting it, between it kind of becoming a very common and popular topic. And so right now, 2021 is going to be big retention. So now, like, that's what I'm thinking a lot about. I mean, what I love about the space is everything is constantly always evolving. Like, I know I just mentioned 2 marketing things, but we talked to plenty of vendors across the board. And so, I mean, it always has to tie back to what is the value for all of the merchants that we currently interact with, and can we provide an insight that will propel their business forward? And to my job is to kind of play the Tetris game of figuring out how all of those things work.
Yeah, I think those are awesome points, and definitely worth like stopping and exploring a bit, because this is just something that I've been noticing. Is like there's a lot of like classic marketing and sales tactics that are like kind of cringy, where you're like, they're like sending like weird, awkward emails, and you're like, I'm so glad I don't have to send that type of email. And like this modern style of marketing is just so much more authentic and easier on everyone. Cause like your conversation then is like, hey, we have a customer who wants to work with you. How do we make this happen? Like, that's not a weird conversation. You're not like putting in like an arbitrary statement, like, to just like kind of force it, like, hey, like we have 24 hours to make this partnership or someone will explode. Like, you don't need to have any like sort of like nonsense email lead. You have a real justification for working together. Like, you have someone who actually wants it on your side. Like, it's just so much smoother and organic. And I think that a lot of like classic marketing is about forcing it. And it's so much better if you start client led and you use that to your advantage to have like the right conversations with the right people. I haven't fully figured out this framework of thinking about things, but it's just been something that I've been noticing more and more. Every time I see a weird LinkedIn message or like LinkedIn post, I think like, thank goodness I don't have to do that.
Yeah. And I think to me, at the end of the day, the most important thing is, especially if it's client led, we know somebody's going to use it at the end of the day.
Yep.
And especially like I came from the product development side, there's nothing worse than you spending a ton of time, effort, just like going to build something and then nobody wants to use it. And especially if it's with a partner, you've like spent a bunch of their time and their resources. And so, yeah, to me, I think it brings so much more value to everybody. And it also is more rewarding because then it's like, okay, we did all this hard work. We like made the massive lift.
Mm-hmm.
And then hopefully you get the success story out of it from the merchant, but you can show that like, hey, this was all worth it because their business went from A to B and it was really meaningful for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that also like, it's just like personally to me more interesting as well.
Yeah. And you've created value for not only your client, but also like the partner, because they're almost certainly getting either a customer or they're having a customer that will have way more retention. Exactly. I mean, that's a secret of Salesforce success. People don't use it because of the amazing CRM. They use it because Salesforce is integrated to everything. So,
or they own everything.
yeah, at this point. But like the more that you can provide that same value, like it creates a powerful moat that there can always be a company that does something you do better and faster as the years pass on. But the integrations will always take work and time and partnerships. And like a new startup can't replicate that. It's like the ones that you already have at the same speed. So like you always have a defensive advantage that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think this works in any business. Like I think I'm super in the weeds right now in like APIs and that type and like B2B SaaS. But when I worked on the D2C side, we did partnerships as well. And whether it was with individuals, other companies, like it's great for every business. Mm-hmm. It's not always the easiest to navigate. And there's a lot of like work that goes into it. But yeah, I mean, it's an incredible, especially with like a really strategic partnership, it's an incredible way to keep people coming back. And also, because I think we always think about it like, oh, it's going to bring in a lot of new clients, but also it's going to keep a lot of existing customers. Mm-hmm. I think that's really a really important piece as well.
Cool. So with Shopify, do you think that there's any like opportunities that a lot of companies are missing out on that they should start doing?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple. So first, because this ecosystem is so centered around integrations and partnerships, one thing that I don't see, or sometimes I see just companies miss, is when they go to configure a new tool, they don't go through the integrations tab and make sure that they've integrated everything they possibly can. I mean, obviously a big part of what we do is make sure that we like read everything and feed data in from all of our sources. But like there's just so many small things that different tools can work together by just plugging everything in. And it's starting to become a lot more standard practice for all of the apps and vendors to integrate with each other as well. So I think that's a big piece, just making sure that there aren't any misses between data being passed one place to the other. Mm-hmm. And then I don't think it's a miss right now. I think what I'm really excited about, and especially like coming out of this into the future, is over the past 3 or 4 years, I've seen some of the brands that really broke out able to build their own retail presence. And while e-com growth as a percentage of GDP has been unbelievable in 2020, while I think it's going to continue to eat up a lot of market share, it's not at least in the short term, near future, it's not going to be the majority of where purchases take place. And I think also just like seeing what happened in China during their reopenings of like revenge spending and all of those other things, retail is going to become a really, really big player. And I think the fact that Shopify just offers that, and it's not included, but you can easily add it on to your existing like Shopify digital presence, that whether you're a small business, whether you're trying to become the next like unicorn or great DTC brand, there's going to be a really, really interesting emergence in retail that, like, what I'm excited about are brands like Tecovas Boots, who have gone and built out like 7 retail stores across their major footprint in Texas, and like building their own experience, really having that flagship experience. Because when you think about the brands that like really, really make it, right? The Nikes, the Apples, the whoever you want to like idolize, they did everything really well, but they had that in-person experience that, like, one of my favorite things is Apple stores, this influencer on LinkedIn, Scott Galloway, always refers to as like an idol to the brand as their retail locations. And I think Apple's not always the best example because they're Apple, but it's that in-person experience. It's that community building moment where, while yes, I love to scale things out and I love to do the one-to-many, you're going to eventually have to have that one-to-one relationship as well. And I think there's going to be a lot in the digital space that moves in that direction, but it's going to be a long time before we can meaningfully recreate a face-to-face interaction. And so I know with everything going on, it's not really applicable for the short term, but to me, 5-10 years from now, I think that you're just seeing massive investments in that space from Shopify, because it's going to come. And I think it's gonna be really interesting to see this kind of new wave of businesses and entrepreneurs, how they solve problems that I don't even know what we have yet, but will come up. I just am really, really excited. And I think Shopify has positioned itself to be at the forefront of that.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, the other thing too is that if you have a very thriving e-commerce business, like, you have money and profit and revenue behind you. So when you create that brick and mortar retail space, you can give a great experience. Like Warby Parker's, like,
another great
all of them provide an awesome experience when you go into the store. And yet so many of these like old school, super famous retail brands, the experience has gotten worse and worse and worse as they've cut cost, been purchased by a bunch of private equity companies. Like, people, the brand name still keeps people coming in, but like, we don't get the experience of 30 years ago when people used to love that brand like nothing else. Like, all of the frills and all the joy has been slowly cut away. But like, the cool thing is, like, if you're an e-commerce brand, like, you don't even need to make particular money. This is just, if nothing else, than just like an effective marketing tool for creating like an idol to your brand. I think that's a good way to think about it. Like, the joy of great customer service cannot be overstated in terms of how much it creates brand identity with the product. And that's best in retail. And it's harder and harder to find with these older school brands, because it's just a natural decline of something that you cut your service and your joy as you go along. So I do agree with you. Like, that is a massive opportunity, and it's something that e-commerce brands can do so much better than what's out there right now.
Yeah. And they're just thinking about so many brands have created like really awesome digital experiences. And if you put that same like thought process with the expertise of how to build out a retail experience, one of my favorite quotes is, retail isn't dead, bad retail is dead. And so I think there's just so many ways to improve, like I don't know if you know the Allbirds, they have a giant hamster wheel in their New York City location. And so I think there's those interesting opportunities that a lot of brands can invest in the future. I also think commercial retail is going to be pretty cheap for quite a while. And so I think it's just going to be another interesting opportunity for a lot of really creative entrepreneurs to go and build really valuable experiences for their customers.
Completely agree. So Jeremy, if someone wants to learn more about Daasity and potentially work with you, what's the best way for that to happen?
Yeah, so we've actually spun up a dedicated landing page for Everflow. So if you go to daasity.com, daasity.com/Everflow, you can come check out more about us. We actually spun up an offer for anyone who's listening to this. You can get a 15-day free trial. We also have a YouTube channel if you want to check out any of those videos that I mentioned. We are constantly, or at least I aspire to constantly be putting out high value content between ourselves and the partners that we work with. So yeah, check us out. We have a great blog as well on Daasity.com. So really appreciate the time. I'm really glad we could share some hopefully actionable insights.
Yeah, and looking forward to new partnership opportunities in the future. Have a wonderful day, wonderful holidays, and cheers.